The thunder of hoofbeats against parched Montana earth stopped abruptly as James Hartwell straightened his back hammer in hand and surveyed the broken fence line stretching before him. September 1883 had been cruel to the territory. The drought showed no mercy, and neither did Samuel Thornton. A man built things. That was what Jim's father had told him before the fever took him when Jim was just 12 years old. A man built things with his hands protected what was his and left something behind when he was gone. Standing there in the late afternoon sun with 200 feet of fence destroyed by last night's storm and 12 head of cattle missing, Jim wondered if building was enough. Wondered if a man could build anything strong enough to withstand what the West threw at it. The wind carried the sound of crying from the main house. Tommy, his son, 3 years old and already learning that life on a ranch meant hardship and loss. The boy had woken before dawn hungry and frightened, his small hands clutching at Jim's shirt as another nightmare about his mother faded into the cruel reality of her absence. Catherine had been gone 3 years now, dead, bringing Tommy into this world. Some men might have blamed the child for that. Jim had tried in those first dark months. But looking into those gray eyes, so like his own, seeing the innocence and need their blame, had turned to something else. Devotion. Fierce, protective love that sometimes felt like it might crush his chest. But love did not fix fences. Love did not stop cattle thieves. Love did not teach a boy how to read or write or figure numbers. Jim could show Tommy how to mend leather, how to read the sky for weather, how to sit a horse, the practical things, the survival things. But the rest? That required something Jim did not have, could not give. He drove another nail into the post, the impact jarring up his arm. $45 worth of fence destroyed. $240 worth of cattle gone. The ranch account held maybe $800 after paying the hands and settling last month's supply bill. Every loss cut deeper when there was so little margin for error. Jack Murphy's gravelly voice carried across the field. Jim turned to see his foreman riding in fast dust trailing behind the Tennessee Walker. Jack was 55 years old, his face lined by decades under Montana sun, and the closest thing to a father Jim had known since his own died in a New York orphanage dormitory. When Jim and Catherine had come west 9 years ago, broke and desperate, Jack had taken a chance on them. Had taught Jim everything about ranching that kept them alive through those first brutal winters. The old man's face told Jim this was not good news before Jack even opened his mouth. "Found 2 more head down by the creek," Jack said, swinging off his horse with practiced ease. "Poisoned, same way as the others last month." Jim's jaw tightened. His hand stilled on the hammer. Poisoned cattle was not rustling. Rustlers took what they could sell. This was something else. This was a message. "Thornton," Jim said. "Not a question. Tracks lead toward his property. 3 riders, probably Hayes and his boys." Jack spat into the dust. "That makes 14 head in 2 months, Jim. At this rate we will not have a herd come spring. 14 cattle, $280, almost half their working capital." Jim looked back toward the house where Tommy's crying had faded to hiccuping sobs. Sarah must have gotten him calmed down. Ben's wife was good with children, had a gentle way about her. But Sarah had her hands full with baby Emma, who had come down with fever 2 days ago. The whole household was stretched thin, fraying at the edges. "Sheriff Miller know?" Jim asked, though he already knew the answer. "Miller knows. Says he cannot prove anything without catching them in the act. Says Thornton has lawyers in Helena who would make any charges disappear." Jack's weathered face creased deeper with frustration. "You know how it works, boss. Money talks. Thornton has plenty of it." Jim did know. Had known since Chicago. Since he had discovered Samuel Thornton's embezzlement scheme and made the mistake of confronting him instead of going straight to the authorities. Since his partner Morrison had died in a convenient accident 2 days later. Since Jim and Catherine had fled west with nothing but what they could carry, and the terrified certainty that Thornton would not forget. For 9 years, Thornton had left them alone. Jim had hoped distance and time would be enough. Then Thornton had arrived in Montana 3 years ago, bought up half the territory with his stolen money, and started building his empire, started pressing his neighbors, started making life difficult for anyone who would not sell out or bow down. The war had been quiet at first, a denied loan here, a broken contract there. Then it had escalated, fences cut, cattle scattered, and now poisoning. "Keep the hands on double watch tonight," Jim said, driving the last nail home with 3 solid strikes. "Hayes wants us scared. I want him knowing we are ready." Jack nodded, started to turn his horse, then paused. "Jim, you cannot fight this alone. Man needs help sometimes. I have you. I have Ben. I have the hands." "That is not what I mean." The old man's eyes were kind but firm. "Tommy needs more than you can give him alone. House needs a woman's touch. You need—" He trailed off the words hanging unspoken between them. Jim turned away, gathering his tools. "What I need is to keep this ranch running and my son safe. Everything else is luxury." He strode toward the barn, conversation over. Behind him, Jack sighed the way he did when Jim was being stubborn. Jim had heard that sigh many times over the years. He ignored it now as he had then. Inside the barn, the familiar smells of hay and horse and leather brought a measure of calm. This he understood. Animals and wood and work. Straightforward. Honest. Not like people who complicated things with needs and wants and expectations Jim could never quite meet. His stallion, a chestnut Tennessee walker named Ranger, nickered a greeting. Jim spent a few minutes checking the horse's hooves, running practiced hands along strong legs, finding comfort in the routine. Ranger had been Catherine's horse originally. She had named him, had loved him. After she died, the horse had become Jim's in that way, possessions transferred between the living and the dead. Another responsibility, another thing to protect. The barn door creaked open. Ben Hartwell came in carrying Tommy on his hip. Jim's younger brother was 35, 3 years his junior, which made Jim 38, though most days he felt decades older. Ben was everything Jim was not. Easygoing where Jim was stern, optimistic where Jim saw only the next crisis. Ben believed the best in people. Jim knew better. "Hey, brother," Ben said, his voice carrying that perpetual cheerfulness that sometimes grated on Jim's nerves. "Little man here wanted to see his papa." Tommy reached out his small arms. "Papa, Papa fix fence." Jim wiped his hands on his pants and took his son. The boy was solid weight, real and warm. His hair was dark like Catherine's had been, but his eyes were pure Hartwell, gray as storm clouds. "Papa fixed the fence," Jim said. "What did you do today?" "Helped Aunt Sarah, I good boy." Tommy's face was bright with 3-year-old pride. "I am sure you were." Jim allowed himself a small smile. The boy was the one pure thing in his life, uncomplicated love. Tommy did not care that Jim was quiet or rough around the edges or carried ghosts he could not shake. Tommy just needed him. Ben leaned against a stall door, his expression turning serious. "Ryder came in from town while you were out, brought news." Jim's gut tightened. "What news?" "Thornton sent a message. He is hiring a governess from back east, some woman named Grace Mitchell, supposed to arrive today on the afternoon stage to teach his children." Jim processed this, turning it over in his mind. Thornton's 3 children were notorious in Silver Creek. Wild, undisciplined, mean as rattlesnakes. They had run off 4 governesses in 2 years. Why would another woman take that position? "Poor woman does not know what she is walking into," Ben said, echoing Jim's thoughts. "Those kids will eat her alive." "Not our problem." "Maybe not, but I was thinking." Ben had that look he got when he was about to suggest something Jim would not like. "We could use help here. Sarah is still weak from Emma's birth, and now with the baby sick she cannot manage the house and help with Tommy too. What if we offered this Mitchell woman a position here instead?" Jim stared at his brother. "You want me to hire Thornton's governess away from him?" "I want you to offer a good woman a better situation. Those Thornton children are devils. Tommy here is an angel. Better job for her, better for us. Win on both sides." "Thornton would see it as an act of war." Ben's easy smile faded. "Brother, we are already at war. He has been fighting us for months. Maybe it is time we pushed back." Jim looked down at Tommy, who had laid his head on Jim's shoulder, thumb in his mouth. The boy was exhausted. They all were. Living on the knife edge of survival, waiting for the next attack, took a toll even on a 3-year-old who did not understand the full danger. "I will think about it," Jim said, which was as close to agreement as he would give. Ben knew better than to push. He clapped Jim on the shoulder. "Supper will be ready soon. Sarah made that stew you like." As Ben left, Jim stood in the quiet barn with his son breathing in the hay-dust air and wondering how long they could hold on. Wondering if Jack was right about needing help. Wondering if there was any help that could be enough against a man like Samuel Thornton. The afternoon sun was slanting toward evening when Jim heard the sound of wagon wheels on the drive. Not the usual supply wagon. This was lighter, faster. A hired rig. He set Tommy down gently. "Go find Uncle Ben, buddy. Papa needs to check on something." Tommy scampered off toward the house and Jim walked out into the yard. The sight that met his eyes made him stop in his tracks. A woman stood beside the road staring at the weathered sign that read Hartwell Ranch in fading paint. She wore a practical traveling dress the color of dust, her honey-brown hair pinned up in a style that spoke of eastern cities and different worlds. A worn carpet bag sat at her feet next to a larger trunk, and the stage that had clearly brought her was already disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Jim approached slowly the way he would a spooked horse. As he got closer, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, mid-20s maybe, pretty in a quiet way that probably went unnoticed in crowds, but it was her expression that caught his attention. Not fear, though she must have been afraid stranded miles from anywhere. Not tears, though he could see moisture gathering in her eyes. Determination. Pure, stubborn determination. "You lost, Miss," Jim said, keeping his voice low and even. She spun around, one hand flying to her chest. Then she collected herself, drew up straight, and met his eyes without flinching. "I believe I am," she said. Her voice carried traces of Pennsylvania, educated but not pretentious. "I was meant to be delivered to Thornton Ranch. I am to be the new governess for Mr. Thornton's children." Jim felt something shift in his chest. Divine intervention or cosmic joke, he was not sure which. But here stood Ben's suggestion made flesh, delivered to his doorstep by an incompetent stage driver. "Thornton Ranch is about 18 miles east of here," he said, removing his hat. His mother, dead though she was, would have tanned his hide for meeting a lady without removing his hat. "I am Jim Hartwell. This is my land you are standing on." She offered her gloved hand with the automatic courtesy of good breeding. "Grace Mitchell. I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Hartwell. Is there perhaps another stage that passes through soon?" Jim glanced at the darkening sky. Storm clouds were building on the horizon, rolling in fast, the way they did in Montana. Lightning flickered in the distance. The temperature had already dropped 10 degrees. "Not for 3 days," he said. "And there is a storm coming in. We get maybe 20 minutes before it hits." Grace Mitchell followed his gaze to the approaching weather. He watched her face as she calculated her options and found them all lacking. When she looked back at him, there was fear there now, but also acceptance. "I see," she said quietly. "I am expected at Thornton Ranch today. They will be concerned when I do not arrive. I can send a rider first thing tomorrow to let them know you have been delayed." Jim picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. It did not. Books, probably. Only books and clothes were this heavy. "Right now, miss, I suggest you let me get you inside before this storm soaks you through." "Mr. Hartwell, I cannot possibly impose." "You can and you will." He was already walking toward the house. "My sister-in-law just had a baby. She could use the help, and you need shelter." Storm does not care about propriety. He heard her pick up her carpet bag and follow. Smart woman. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they reached the porch. The main house was built of sturdy logs and stone designed to withstand Montana winters. Inside it was warm and cluttered in the way homes with small children always were. Toys scattered across the floor, dishes waiting to be washed, the comfortable chaos of life being lived. Sarah looked up from where she sat in the rocking chair, baby Emma finally sleeping against her shoulder. Her eyes widened at the sight of Grace. "Sarah, we have a guest," Jim said, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the baby. "Miss Grace Mitchell was delivered to the wrong ranch. She was meant for Thornton's place." Understanding flashed across Sarah's face, followed by something that looked like hope. "Oh, what wonderful timing. I have been praying for some help." She carefully transferred the sleeping infant to one arm and extended her free hand. "Sarah Hartwell, that sleeping angel is Emma, and somewhere around here is my husband Ben and our nephew Tommy." "Pleased to meet you," Grace said, and Jim could hear genuine warmth in her voice. Not the false sweetness some women used, but real kindness. "I hope I am not imposing. The stage driver made an error, and Mr. Hartwell was kind enough to offer shelter before the storm." "Imposing, heavens, no." Sarah's smile was tired but sincere. "With Emma sick and Tommy needing attention and Jim working sunrise to sunset, I could use an extra pair of hands. That is, if you do not mind helping out while you are here." Grace set down her bag, her posture relaxing slightly. "I would be happy to help. I have experience with children and household management." Jim watched this exchange with the feeling of events moving faster than he could control. But Tommy chose that moment to come running from the back room, followed by Ben. "Papa! Papa! Back!" The boy launched himself at Jim's legs. Jim scooped him up. "Easy, buddy. We have company. Can you say hello to Miss Mitchell?" Tommy turned his face into Jim's shoulder, suddenly shy. Grace stepped closer, her expression softening in a way that transformed her face. "Hello, Tommy," she said gently. "My name is Grace. What a brave boy you are." Tommy peeked at her, then buried his face again. Jim felt the boy's small body trembling slightly. Another nightmare afternoon, probably. Sarah had done her best, but the boy was struggling. "He has had a hard day," Jim said quietly. "Been having them since his mother passed." The words were out before he could stop them. He never talked about Catherine to strangers, never explained. But something about the way Grace was looking at Tommy with such understanding and compassion had loosened his tongue. "I am so sorry," Grace said, and he believed her. Loss is hard at any age, but for one so young it must be terrifying. She understood. Somehow this stranger understood in a way most people did not. They offered platitudes about time healing or God's plan, but she saw the fear, the fundamental terror of a child who had lost the person who made the world safe. Ben cleared his throat. "Well, why do not I show Miss Mitchell where she can freshen up Grace? If you are agreeable, you could stay in our guest room tonight. We will figure out how to get you to Thornton's tomorrow." Jim caught his brother's meaningful look. They both knew what tomorrow would bring. Another conversation about hiring her away. Another decision Jim would have to make. Grace followed Sarah to the back of the house. Jim set Tommy down and turned to find Ben grinning at him. "Not a word," Jim said. "I did not say anything." "You are thinking loud enough." Ben's grin widened. "Just thinking she seems nice, capable, good with the boy already. She is Thornton's hire." "Not yet. Not officially. Stage got her here first. That is fate, brother." "That is a mistake. Best mistakes are the ones you do not plan for." Ben clapped him on the shoulder and headed toward the kitchen. "Supper in 30 minutes. Best clean up." Jim stood in the main room holding his son, listening to the storm begin to rage outside. Through the window, he could see lightning splitting the sky, illuminating the vast emptiness of Montana territory. Somewhere out there, 18 miles east, Samuel Thornton sat in his empire built on blood money and lies, waiting for a governess who would never arrive. And here in this house that same governess was washing road dust from her hands and probably wondering what kind of place she had landed in. Right mistake, Jim thought, or wrong place, right time. He was not sure which. But standing there with Tommy's warm weight in his arms and the sound of feminine voices drifting from the back room for the first time in 3 years, Jim felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The storm raged outside. Inside, warmth and light pushed back against the darkness. And for just a moment, Jim let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, some mistakes were meant to be made. Supper was a quieter affair than usual. Emma's fever had everyone on edge, and Sarah kept getting up to check on the baby every few minutes, despite Grace's gentle insistence that she could help. The meal itself was simple but filling. Venison stew, cornbread, and dried apples stewed with cinnamon. The kind of food that stuck to a person's ribs and got them through hard work. Jim watched Grace from across the table. She ate with good manners, but no pretension complimenting Sarah's cooking genuinely. She helped Tommy with his spoon when the boy struggled, showing him how to scoop instead of just doing it for him. Small things, but they spoke to character. "So, Miss Mitchell," Ben said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what brings you all the way from Pennsylvania to Montana?" Grace set down her spoon carefully. "My parents passed last winter. Influenza. They left me very little, and what there was went to paying debts and funeral costs. I had been teaching in a one-room schoolhouse for 6 years, but when I saw the advertisement for a governess position with room and board included, it seemed like Providence." Her voice remained steady, but Jim saw the tightness around her eyes. Recent grief still raw. He knew that look, had seen it in his own mirror often enough. "I am sorry for your loss," Sarah said softly. "Thank you. They were good people. My father believed strongly in education, said it was the only thing no one could take from you." Grace smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "He taught me to read from his Bible and an old almanac, determined his daughter would have opportunities he never had." "Sounds like a wise man," Jim said, the first full sentence he had spoken at the table. Grace looked at him directly. "He was. He also taught me that honest work builds character and that a person's word is their bond." Jim heard the message beneath the words. She was telling him something, that she valued honesty, that she would keep her commitments, that despite being stranded and afraid, she had principles. "Your father would be proud," Jim said quietly. "Coming all this way, ready to start over. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Grace said with a self-deprecating smile. "Sometimes they look remarkably similar." Jim almost smiled. "Almost. Fair enough." After supper, Grace insisted on helping with cleanup despite Sarah's protests. Jim sat on the front porch with Tommy on his lap, watching the storm move off to the east. Lightning still flickered in the distance, but the worst had passed. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility. Ben came out 2 cups of coffee in hand. He passed one to Jim and settled into the chair beside him. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked. "That we should not have let that stage driver leave." "That is not what I meant." Jim sipped his coffee. It was strong and bitter the way he liked it. "I know what you meant. She is good with Tommy. I noticed. Sarah likes her. I noticed that too. And," Ben turned to face him, "brother, when are you going to stop being so damn stubborn? A gift just landed on our doorstep. Take it." "She has a commitment to Thornton. A commitment made under false pretenses. You think that man told her the truth about those devil children, about how he treats people?" Ben's voice rose with frustration. "She does not owe him anything." Jim looked down at Tommy, who had fallen asleep against his chest. The boy's face was peaceful for the first time all day. Offering her a position here would start a war with Thornton. "We are already at war. He is killing our cattle, destroying our property, trying to drive us out. What difference does it make?" "The difference is, we keep our honor," Jim said quietly. "We do not become like him." "There is nothing dishonorable about offering an honest position to an honest woman," Ben countered. "You would be saving her from a bad situation and helping your own family at the same time. That is called being smart." Jim did not answer. Inside the house he could hear Grace's voice singing softly. Some lullaby from her childhood, probably. The melody drifted through the window, sweet and sad and achingly familiar. Catherine used to sing to Tommy. "She sounds like her," Ben said quietly, following Jim's thoughts. "A little. Do not. I am just saying. It has been 3 years, Jim. Catherine would not want you living like this, half alive, going through motions. She would want Tommy to have what you cannot give him." Jim's jaw clenched. What I cannot give him, I did not mean it like that. Ben held up his hands. You are a good father, the best, but you work yourself to death trying to do everything alone. You need help. Tommy needs help, and that woman in there needs a decent position. Why is asking for help so hard for you? Because people leave, Jim said. The words came out harder than he intended. People die. People betray you. The only person you can count on is yourself. That is a lonely way to live. It is a safe way to live. Ben shook his head. Safe and alone are not the same as strong brother, and Tommy deserves better than watching you carry the world on your shoulders until it crushes you. He stood setting his empty cup on the porch rail. Think about it. That is all I ask. Just think about it. After Ben went inside, Jim sat alone with his sleeping son. The stars were coming out now, brilliant and cold in the vast Montana sky. Out here a man could see for miles, see opportunity or see danger depending on what he looked for. The door opened quietly. Grace stepped out onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling air. I am sorry, she said softly. I did not mean to intrude on your solitude. You are not intruding. Jim shifted Tommy slightly. Could not sleep. Too much has happened today. My mind is still racing. She moved to the porch rail, looking out at the darkness. It is so vast here, so empty. Back home you were never more than a few miles from the next town. Here you can ride for days and see nothing but grass and sky. It can be lonely, Jim admitted. Or peaceful, Grace said, depending on how you look at it. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that does not need filling. Jim found himself grateful for that. Too many people felt compelled to chatter as if quiet was something to be feared. Mr. Hartwell, Grace said finally, I wanted to thank you for your hospitality, for not leaving me stranded out there. Some men might have. Some men are fools. Even so, it was kind. She turned to face him. I also wanted to say that I understand if having me here is awkward. Mr. Thornton will likely be upset when he learns I did not arrive as planned. I do not wish to cause trouble for you. Jim studied her face in the starlight. She was worried, genuinely concerned about putting them in difficulty. Most people would have been focused solely on their own predicament. Miss Mitchell, you have not caused any trouble. The stage driver made an error. That is not your fault. Still, I should reach Thornton Ranch as soon as possible. Jim hesitated. The offer Ben wanted him to make hovered on his tongue. One sentence could change everything, could bring help to his household, could give Tommy what he needed, could also bring Thornton's wrath down on them harder than ever. But looking at Grace Mitchell standing there, worry creasing her brow, Jim knew he could not send her to Thornton, could not deliver this decent woman into that den of vipers. Whether he offered her a position or not, he would not be the one to seal her fate at Thornton Ranch. Let us see what tomorrow brings, he said instead. Sometimes things work out different than planned. Grace smiled. My father used to say that God's plans often look like mistakes until you see the full picture. Sounds like something my mother would have said before she died. You lost her young. 12 years old. Fever took her. My father, too. Jim did not usually share this, did not talk about the orphanage or the hunger or the fear of those years before he aged out and found work. It is part of what brought me west. Wanted to build something that would last, something solid for Tommy. Grace's expression softened. And you have. This ranch, this family. Tommy is lucky to have you. I am lucky to have him. He is the only good thing Catherine left behind. The words hung in the air. Grace did not offer platitudes or false comfort. She just nodded, understanding what he did not say. That Tommy was the only thing keeping Jim going some days. That purpose and love were sometimes the same thing. I should get some sleep, Grace said after a moment. Tomorrow will be a long day, I imagine. Good night, Miss Mitchell. Good night, Mr. Hartwell, and thank you again. She went inside, leaving Jim alone with his son and the stars and thoughts that circled like hawks over prey. Ben was right. The woman was a gift. Capable, kind, good with children, and in need of honest work. Everything they needed. But accepting that gift meant consequences. Meant standing up to Thornton more directly than they had yet dared. Meant admitting he could not do everything alone. Jim looked down at Tommy's sleeping face, so innocent, so trusting. The boy deserved more than a father who was just barely holding on, deserved stability and care and maybe even happiness. "Your mama would know what to do," Jim whispered to his sleeping son. "She was better at this than me." But Catherine was gone, and tomorrow would come whether Jim was ready or not. Decisions would have to be made. Inside the house, the lamplight flickered and dimmed. One by one, his family settled in for the night. Grace in the guest room, Sarah and Ben with baby Emma, Tommy warm and safe in his arms, and Jim Hartwell sitting on the porch of the ranch he had built with his own hands, wondering if Providence or chance had delivered Grace Mitchell to his doorstep and what price he would pay for the choice he already knew he was going to make. The storm had passed, but another one was coming. Jim could feel it in his bones. And this time it would not be rain and lightning that tested them. This time it would be Samuel Thornton's rage. The morning came cold and clear, the kind of dawn that made a man grateful to be alive in Montana. Jim had been up since before first light as always. The cattle needed checking, fences needed walking, and work did not wait for a man to catch up on sleep he had lost thinking about brown-haired women and impossible decisions. He found Grace already in the kitchen when he came in for breakfast. She had an apron tied around her waist and was efficiently cracking eggs into a bowl while bacon sizzled in the pan. Sarah sat at the table with Emma, looking more rested than she had in days. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," Grace said with a smile. "I hope you do not mind. I woke early and thought I might help with breakfast." Jim just nodded, unsure what to say. The kitchen smelled like home. Like the mornings before Catherine died, when he would come in from early chores to find her cooking, humming to herself. The similarity was jarring and painful and oddly comforting all at once. Tommy came running in, his face lighting up when he saw Grace. "Miss Grace, you stay?" "Just for a little while, sweetheart," Grace said, ruffling his hair. "Why do not you wash your hands? Breakfast is almost ready." The boy obeyed immediately. Jim raised an eyebrow. Getting Tommy to wash his hands usually required 3 requests and a bribe. Breakfast was eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Grace served everyone with quiet efficiency, making sure Tommy's plate was cut into manageable pieces before setting it in front of him. "This is wonderful," Sarah said around a mouthful of biscuit. "Grace, you are a miracle worker." "Just doing what needs doing," Grace said. But Jim saw the pleased flush on her cheeks. She was a woman who took pride in her work. Ben came in stamping mud off his boots. "Morning all. Grace that smells amazing. Marry me, and I will give you my entire salary." "You are already married, Ben," Sarah said dryly. "Details, details." Ben grinned and kissed his wife's cheek before sitting down. The easy banter continued through breakfast. Jim ate in silence, watching Grace interact with his family. She fit. That was the uncomfortable truth. After one night and one morning, she fit into their household like she had always been there. When breakfast was done, Grace insisted on cleaning up despite protests. Jim took the opportunity to step outside with Ben. "Well," Ben said the moment they were out of earshot. "I will offer her a position," Jim said. $30 a month room and board, focus on Tommy's education and helping Sarah with household management. Ben's face split into a grin. "That is the smartest thing you have said in 3 years. This will not go well with Thornton." "Nothing goes well with Thornton. At least this way we get something out of it." Ben grew serious. "You are doing the right thing, brother. For Tommy. For all of us." Jim nodded, but his gut was tight with apprehension. He walked back to the barn, running through what he would say. How to make the offer without sounding desperate. How to be honest about the situation without scaring her off. He was still rehearsing when Jack rode up at a gallop, his face grave. "Jim, we got a problem. Big one." Jim's hand went automatically to the rifle he kept in the barn. "What kind of problem?" "Ryder just came through from town. Says there was a fire at Thornton Ranch last night. Schoolroom burned down. Jim felt ice slide down his spine. Anyone hurt? No injuries, but considerable damage. And here's the thing. Jack dismounted, his expression grim. Word is the kids set the fire. After Thornton hired some new governess yesterday morning who showed up and then quit after meeting the children. Now Thornton is looking for Grace Mitchell, who never arrived, and he is blaming everyone in sight. The ice in Jim's veins turned to steel. He is going to blame her for not showing up, for the fire happening because he had to scramble to replace her. That is my thinking too. Man like Thornton does not take kindly to looking foolish, and having to fire and hire 2 governesses in one day, that makes him look weak. Jim turned and walked back to the house. His decision had just been made for him. Consequences be damned. He found Grace in the kitchen drying the last of the breakfast dishes. "Miss Mitchell, could I speak with you privately?" Grace followed him out to the porch, worry creasing her forehead. "Is something wrong?" "Depends on how you look at it." Jim took a breath. "I have some news about Thornton Ranch. There was a fire last night. Schoolroom burned down. The children allegedly started it." Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no. Was anyone hurt?" "No injuries. But Thornton is by all accounts furious. He is looking for you, likely to blame you for not arriving when you were supposed to. But that is hardly fair. The stage driver made an error. Fairness does not much concern Samuel Thornton." Jim met her eyes directly. "Miss Mitchell, I need to tell you something about Thornton, about why I came to Montana, and then I have an offer to make you." He told her. Not everything. Not about Morrison's death or his suspicions of murder, but enough. About the embezzlement he had discovered, about fleeing Chicago with Catherine, about Thornton following years later with stolen money and a vendetta. Grace listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You are saying Mr. Thornton is a dangerous man," she said slowly. "I am saying he is a man who does not forgive slights real or imagined, and you have inadvertently slighted him." "I see." Grace looked out at the ranch spread before them. "What is the offer you mentioned?" "Work for me instead, $30 a month, room and board. Teach Tommy, help Sarah with the household. It would not be easy. We are not wealthy. Thornton will make trouble for us because of it, but it would be honest work with good people." Grace was quiet for so long Jim thought she would refuse. Then she squared her shoulders and looked him in the eye. "I accept," she said simply. "On one condition." Jim blinked. He had expected more questions, more hesitation. "What condition?" "That you teach Tommy not just letters and numbers, but everything you know. About this land, about ranching, about survival. I can give him book learning, but you can give him something more valuable. Teach him to be the kind of man his father is." Something in Jim's chest tightened painfully. "I am not sure that is a compliment, Miss Mitchell." "It is the highest compliment I can give, Mr. Hartwell. You are a man who protects what is his, who works until his hands bleed, who loves his son enough to admit he needs help. That is the kind of man this country needs more of." Jim extended his hand. "Then we have an agreement." Grace shook it firmly. "We do, and Mr. Hartwell, call me Grace." "Jim," he said, "formalities do not last long out here anyway." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. And for the first time since Catherine died, Jim felt like maybe, just maybe, the future held something besides endless work and worry. Of course, first they had to survive Samuel Thornton finding out. That reckoning came faster than expected. The decision was made. Grace Mitchell would stay at Hartwell Ranch, and Jim would send word to Samuel Thornton that very afternoon. Ben volunteered to ride to Silver Creek and deliver the message personally to avoid any confusion. Jack Murphy advised against it. "That man is going to see this as theft," Jack said, standing in the barn with Jim while they saddled horses. "He hired her first in his mind. Does not matter that she never made it to his place. Then he should have hired better directions for his stage driver." Jim tightened the cinch on Ranger's saddle. "Grace needs work. Tommy needs teaching. It is that simple." "Nothing with Thornton is ever simple." Jack spat into the dirt. but I reckon you know that already." Jim did know, had known from the moment he made the offer. But watching Grace with Tommy that morning, seeing the boy's face light up when she showed him how to write his name with a stick in the dirt, had cemented the choice. Some things were worth the cost. Ben rode out mid-morning with a letter explaining the situation. Jim had written it carefully, keeping his tone neutral and factual. The stage had delivered Miss Mitchell to Hartwell Ranch by error. Given the distance and the storm, they had offered her shelter. Upon learning of her intended position and the fire at Thornton Ranch, Miss Mitchell had accepted employment with the Hartwell family instead. The letter concluded with an expression of hope that this would not cause undue inconvenience. Jim knew it was a lie wrapped in politeness. Thornton would see through it immediately. The war that had been simmering would now boil over. But that was a problem for later. For now there was work to be done. Grace proved herself worth every penny of the $30 Jim had promised her. By midday she had organized the chaotic household into something resembling order. Breakfast dishes were washed and put away. Laundry was soaking in the big tub out back. Emma's fever had broken overnight, and Sarah was finally able to rest while Grace watched both children. Jim found her in the yard teaching Tommy his letters, using stones arranged in the dust. The boy was focused in a way Jim rarely saw, his small face scrunched in concentration as he tried to copy the letter T Grace had drawn. "That is it, Tommy," Grace encouraged. "See how the line goes down and then across the top, just like a fence post with a rail." Tommy's face lit up. "Like Papa's fence." "Exactly like your Papa's fence. You are very clever." Jim watched from the barn doorway, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Pride in his son, certainly, but also something else, something that looked dangerously like contentment. "She is good with him," Sarah said, appearing at Jim's elbow. The baby was asleep in her arms, finally peaceful after days of fever and fussing. Better than good. Tommy has not been this focused since before Catherine died. Jim nodded, not trusting his voice. "It is all right to be grateful, you know," Sarah continued softly. "Catherine would want you to be, would want Tommy to have this." "I know." The words came out rougher than he intended. "Does not make it feel any less like betrayal. Love is not betrayal, and neither is moving forward." Sarah shifted the baby to her other shoulder. "Catherine is gone, Jim, but Tommy is still here. You are still here. And that woman out there is offering you both a chance at something better than just surviving." Before Jim could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was approaching fast, too fast for casual business. Jim's hand went to the rifle leaning against the barn wall. He recognized the horse before he recognized the rider. Sheriff Nathan Miller, coming from the direction of Silver Creek. "Jack," Jim called. The foreman appeared from the equipment shed, his own rifle in hand. They had been on edge for months. Expecting trouble had become second nature. Sheriff Miller reined in his horse dust billowing around him. He was 52 years old, weathered and steady, the kind of lawman who preferred talking to shooting, but would do both if necessary. Jim had always respected him, even when the man's hands were tied by politics and money. "Jim?" Miller dismounted, removing his hat. "Ma'am?" He nodded to Sarah. "I need to speak with you, and with Miss Mitchell if she is here." Grace had already gathered Tommy and was walking toward them, her expression guarded but calm. Jim appreciated that. No hysterics. Just quiet competence in the face of uncertainty. "I am Grace Mitchell," she said when she reached them. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" Miller's weathered face creased with what might have been sympathy. "I am afraid there is, miss. I have been asked to deliver these to you." He pulled folded papers from his coat. "Legal documents. From Samuel Thornton." Jim's jaw clenched. Faster than he had expected. Thornton was not wasting time. Grace took the papers with steady hands. She unfolded them, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Jim watched her face pale slightly, but her hands did not shake. "This is a lawsuit," she said quietly, "for breach of contract." "Yes, ma'am." Miller's tone was apologetic. "Mr. Thornton claims you signed a contract to serve as governess for his children. Says you failed to honor that contract, causing him financial harm and reputational damage. He is seeking $500 in damages." $500? Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not have $500. I have $28 to my name." "I know, miss. I am sorry." Miller looked genuinely uncomfortable. "He has also filed for payment of his legal fees, which would be another $200 roughly. $700 total, more than 2 years' wages." The number hit Jim like a physical blow. This was not just a warning shot. This was Thornton going for the throat. "There was no contract," Grace said, her voice gaining strength. "We exchanged letters. He offered the position, I accepted, but I never signed any formal contract. He claims to have a signed contract on file, miss. Says you signed it before leaving Pennsylvania." Grace's eyes flashed with sudden understanding. "He forged my signature. He must have. I signed nothing beyond letters." "That is a serious accusation." Miller's tone was careful neutral. "One you will need to prove in court." "When is the court date?" Jim asked. 3 weeks from now, in Helena." Miller looked at Jim directly. "I will be honest with you, Jim. Judge Peters is hearing the case, and Judge Peters has taken several loans from Territorial Bank, which Thornton owns a majority stake in." The message was clear. The deck was stacked. Thornton had money lawyers and a judge in his pocket. Grace had nothing but the truth, and truth was a poor weapon against wealth and influence. "I see," Jim said quietly. "Thank you for bringing this, Nathan. For what it is worth, I do not think this is right." Miller replaced his hat. "But the law is the law, and these papers are legal. Miss Mitchell needs to respond or face default judgment." After Miller rode away, they stood in heavy silence. Tommy had wandered back to his stones, oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around him. Sarah had retreated to the house with the baby. Only Jim, Grace, and Jack remained in the yard, 3 people facing down a storm with no shelter in sight. "I will leave," Grace said finally. "I will pack my things and go. Tell Thornton I am withdrawing my acceptance of employment here. Maybe he will drop the lawsuit." "No." Jim's voice was flat final. "Mr. Hartwell, I cannot let you fight my battle. This is my problem. It stopped being just your problem the moment Thornton decided to use you as a weapon against me." Jim met her eyes. "This is not about you, Grace. This is about him and me, about Chicago, about him trying to control everything and everyone in this territory. You are just the excuse he has been waiting for." "Then I am making it worse by staying." "You are making it better by staying. Tommy needs you. Sarah needs you, and I will be damned if I let Samuel Thornton dictate who works on my ranch." Grace looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or shared stubbornness. "You are certain?" "I am certain." "Then I suppose we need a lawyer." Grace folded the papers carefully. "Though I have no idea how to afford one." "We will figure it out." Jim turned to Jack. "Can you manage things here for a few days? Where are you going?" "Helena. To find someone willing to take on Thornton." Jim looked back at Grace. "And you are coming with me. If we are going to fight this, you need to understand what we are up against." The next 2 days were a flurry of preparation. Ben would stay to manage the ranch with Jack's help. Sarah was recovered enough to handle the household. Grace spent hours with Tommy teaching him basic letters and numbers, preparing him for her absence. Jim watched these lessons when he could, fascinated by Grace's patience. When Tommy struggled with a concept, she would find a new way to explain it, would use examples from ranch life, would never show frustration or disappointment, only encouragement. "You are a natural teacher," Jim observed one evening as Grace was putting Tommy to bed. "I love it," she said simply. "There is something miraculous about watching a mind open, about seeing a child suddenly understand something that was impossible moments before." Catherine wanted Tommy to have education, said she did not care if he became a rancher or a lawyer or anything else as long as he could read and think for himself. Jim had not spoken his wife's name aloud to anyone but family in 2 years. The word felt strange on his tongue. "She would have liked you." Grace looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "I wish I could have known her. To have raised a son like Tommy, she must have been extraordinary. She was scared. Jim said, the honesty surprising him. Scared of the ranch, scared of the isolation, scared of failing as a mother. But she loved him fierce, loved him enough that I think the fear might have killed her before the childbirth did. Fear can be as deadly as any disease, Grace agreed quietly. My mother died of influenza, but I think fear made her susceptible. She was so afraid after my father died, afraid she would not be able to manage alone. But you managed. I had no choice. Fear is a luxury when survival is on the line. She tucked the blanket around Tommy's sleeping form, and I learned that most fear is about things that never happen. The real dangers are usually the ones you do not see coming. Like stagecoaches delivering you to the wrong ranch, Jim thought. Like falling in love with a woman you met 3 days ago. He pushed that thought aside quickly. Too dangerous, too soon, too complicated. They left for Helena before dawn on the 3rd day. Jim drove the wagon while Grace sat beside him, both of them bundled against the September morning chill. The journey would take most of the day. 8 hours by wagon over rough roads through territory that was still wild enough to be dangerous. Jim had his rifle within easy reach. Grace noticed, but said nothing. Smart woman. The first few hours passed in comfortable silence. Jim was not much for conversation, even on a good day, and Grace seemed content to watch the landscape roll past. Montana in September was beautiful in a harsh way. The grass had gone golden from summer drought. The mountains in the distance were sharp as knife edges against the brilliant blue sky. Everything felt bigger here, more real. "Tell me about Chicago," Grace said as they stopped to water the horses at a creek crossing. "What was your life like before Montana?" Jim considered not answering, considered keeping that door closed. But they were riding into battle together. She deserved to know what she was fighting. "I worked for an investment firm, Morrison and Associates. Good job, decent pay. Catherine and I had a small apartment in a decent neighborhood. We were saving to buy a house." Jim checked the horse's hooves while he talked, finding it easier to speak when his hands were occupied. "We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable, had friends, had prospects." "What changed?" "I noticed discrepancies in the accounts. Small at first, $50 here, $100 there. Clients' money going where it should not. I traced it back to Samuel Thornton. He was Morrison's nephew brought into the firm as a favor." Jim straightened, his voice hardening. Confronted him. He said it was a misunderstanding, that he would fix it. Then Morrison died in a carriage accident 2 days later. Grace went very still. "You think Thornton killed him?" "I think it was convenient timing. Morrison was going to review the accounts himself. Instead he died, and Thornton inherited his share of the firm." Jim met her eyes. "I had no proof, no evidence, just suspicion and a dead partner. Catherine and I left Chicago that week, came west to start over. And Thornton followed. Not right away. Took him 5 years to show up here. By then I thought maybe he had forgotten, or maybe he never knew I suspected him of Morrison's death." Jim's laugh was bitter. "I was wrong. Men like Thornton do not forget. They just wait for the right moment." Grace absorbed this in silence. Then she asked the question Jim had been dreading. "Is he capable of killing again?" "Yes." The word was flat, certain. "Which is why I need you to understand what we are up against. This is not just about money or pride. If Thornton thinks either of us is a threat to him, he will eliminate that threat. By legal means if possible, by other means if necessary. Then why fight? Why not just give him what he wants?" "Because Tommy is watching," Jim said simply. "And I will not teach my son that running away from bullies is how a man lives his life." They reached Helena as the sun was setting. The territorial capital was bigger than Silver Creek by a factor of 10. Wide streets lined with false-fronted buildings. A proper courthouse, hotels, saloons, and shops. The kind of civilization that felt foreign after months in open country. Jim secured rooms at a modest hotel. 2 rooms side by side, proper and respectable. Then they went in search of lawyers willing to take on Samuel Thornton. The first 3 offices turned them away before they even finished explaining the situation. The 4th lawyer, a man named Moore, at least listened to their story before declining. "Thornton has deep pockets and deeper connections," Moore said apologetically. "I have a family to feed, cannot afford to make an enemy of him." The 5th and 6th lawyers gave similar responses. By the time they reached the 7th office, Jim was ready to handle this matter with his fists rather than the law. But the 7th lawyer was different. Benjamin Wright was 70 years old, if he was a day. His office was cramped and dusty, piled high with law books and case files that looked like they had not been disturbed in years. But his eyes were sharp, and when Jim explained the situation, Wright listened with the intensity of a man who had spent his life weighing evidence and finding truth. "Forged signature, you say?" Wright leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly. "That is a serious charge." "I signed no contract," Grace said firmly. "I have copies of our correspondence. Letters only, no formal contract." Wright held out his hand. "Let me see." Grace produced the letters she had carefully saved. Wright read them slowly, his age-spotted fingers tracing the words. Then he examined Thornton's lawsuit documents with equal care. Finally, he set everything down and looked at them over his spectacles. "This is clearly fraud. The signature on this contract does not match the signatures on your letters. Any handwriting expert would confirm it." Hope flickered in Jim's chest. "So we can fight it." "You can fight it. Whether you can win is another question." Wright templed his fingers. "Judge Peters is hearing the case, you said?" "That is what Sheriff Miller told us." "Peters is in Thornton's pocket, has been for years. He will find for Thornton regardless of evidence." Wright's expression turned calculating. "But if we can prove fraud, we can appeal to a higher court, or better yet, get the case transferred to a different judge." "How?" Grace leaned forward. "How do we prove fraud enough to force a transfer?" "We need more evidence, not just of the forged contract, but of a pattern of behavior. If we can show that Thornton has done this before, has systematically used the legal system to harass and intimidate people, we might be able to argue for recusal based on bias." Jim's mind was already racing. How many cases would we need? 3 or 4 would be strong. 5 or more would be irrefutable. Wright pulled out paper and pen. "Give me names. Anyone Thornton has sued or driven out of the territory. Anyone who might be willing to testify." They compiled a list. The Williams family forced to sell their farm at a loss. The Henderson Ranch driven to bankruptcy by mysterious cattle deaths and denied bank loans. A merchant named Chin who had to close his store after Thornton spread rumors of tainted goods. The stories went on. "This will take time," Wright warned, "and money. My fee is $200 half up front, plus travel expenses to track down witnesses." Jim's heart sank. He had maybe $300 in the bank. Paying Wright would leave them dangerously thin for the winter ahead. Grace must have seen his hesitation. "I have my $28, and I can defer my salary until this is resolved." "No," Jim said immediately. "You need to be paid for your work." "I need to not be in debt for $700 more," Grace countered. "My salary can wait. The ranch cannot." Wright watched this exchange with interest. "You two are not married." "Miss Mitchell is employed as a governess for my son," Jim said stiffly. "Interesting." Wright made a note. "Thornton will use that. Will imply impropriety. Suggest your household is morally questionable." Jim felt heat rise in his face. "There is nothing improper about our arrangement." "I believe you, but Thornton's lawyers will paint a different picture. A young unmarried woman living in a household with 2 adult men and no proper chaperone beyond a sister-in-law." Wright's expression was matter-of-fact. "They will suggest that her reputation is already damaged, that you took advantage of her vulnerable position, that the whole situation is unseemly." Grace's cheeks had flushed, but her voice remained steady. "Let them suggest what they want. The truth is that the Hartwell household has treated me with nothing but respect and kindness, more than Mr. Thornton would have, I suspect." The truth and what people believe are often 2 different things. Wright stood signaling the meeting was ending. "But we will fight this. Bring me that $100 tomorrow, and I will start tracking down witnesses. We have 3 weeks until the court date. It is enough time if we move fast." They left Wright's office as full dark settled over Helena. The streets were lit by oil lamps casting pools of yellow light that barely pushed back the shadows. Jim was acutely aware of Grace walking beside him, of her proximity, of the way people looked at them. A man and a woman, alone traveling together. Wright's words about impropriety echoed in his head. They had walked 2 blocks when Jim noticed her. A woman stood in the doorway of the Grand Hotel, watching them. Not casually, deliberately. She was perhaps 32, elegantly dressed in traveling clothes that spoke of money and breeding. But there was something in her posture, tension, fear masked by determination. When their eyes met, she stepped forward. "Mr. Hartwell." Her voice was refined Eastern education, clear in every syllable. "James Hartwell from Chicago." Jim's hand went to his pistol. "Who is asking?" "Someone who knew Morrison." The woman's eyes flicked to Grace, then back to Jim. "Someone who has been looking for you. My name is Eleanor Harrington. John Morrison was my uncle. Samuel Thornton is my brother." The name hit Jim like a fist. Morrison, his dead partner, the man Thornton had murdered. "Morrison did not have a daughter," Jim said carefully. "He had a nephew, Samuel Thornton. Morrison was my uncle. My maiden name was Thornton." Eleanor's voice dropped. "Samuel is my brother, and I am here to help you destroy him." Jim exchanged a glance with Grace. This could be a trap, or it could be the weapon they needed. "Why should I trust you?" Jim asked. "Because I have spent 8 years in a sanitarium that Samuel put me in. Because I have evidence of his crimes that authorities refuse to see. Because I know he is coming after you, and I can help you stop him." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I saw you hire Benjamin Wright. I know about the lawsuit against Miss Mitchell. Samuel is using the same tactics he used to destroy others." "What evidence?" Grace asked. Eleanor pulled a small journal from her bag. "Father's real will, letters from Samuel, financial records, witness statements. Everything is in a safe place, but I need allies, people Samuel has not yet bought or intimidated." Jim studied her face. He saw exhaustion there, fear, but also determination that matched Grace's own. "The town meeting," Jim said. "Thornton called a town meeting Thursday. He is going to paint us as villains." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then Thursday is when we expose him, in front of everyone, where he cannot hide." "That is dangerous," Grace said. "He threatened you. He will know you betrayed him." "I have been living in danger for 8 years. I am done hiding." Eleanor looked between them. "Will you help me? Will you let me help you?" Jim made his decision. "Yes, but we do this smart. We plan. We make sure the evidence is protected." "Agreed." Eleanor's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I have a room at the Grand Hotel. Can we meet tomorrow? I will show you everything I have." 10 o'clock, Jim said. "Wright's office." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. Miss Mitchell, you have given me hope for the first time in years." She disappeared into the hotel. Jim and Grace stood in the lamplight processing what had just happened. "Do you trust her?" Grace asked. "I do not know, but we do not have many options." Jim offered his arm. "Come, let us get you back to the hotel." They walked in silence through streets that grew progressively rougher as they moved away from the main thoroughfares. Jim kept his hand near his pistol. Helena after dark was not safe for anyone, let alone a woman alone. They were 2 blocks from the hotel when Jim heard the footsteps behind them. Multiple sets, moving fast. He turned just as 3 men emerged from an alley. Big men, rough-looking, the kind who made their living with their fists and did not ask too many questions about whose face they were breaking. Jim Hartwell. The speaker was tall, scarred, with eyes dead as a snake's. "We got a message for you, from Mr. Thornton." Jim pushed Grace behind him. "Deliver it then." "Message is this. Go home. Drop the girl. Forget you ever heard of Samuel Thornton." The man cracked his knuckles. "Or things get unpleasant." "I think they are already unpleasant." Jim's hand rested on his pistol. You boys should move along. See, we cannot do that." The man smiled, showing broken teeth. "We got paid to make sure you understand. Paid good." They moved fast. Jim had his pistol out, but the first man was already on him, knocking the gun aside. Jim drove his fist into the man's gut, felt the impact jar up his arm. The man grunted, stumbled back. The second attacker came at Jim from the side. Jim turned, caught a fist to his ribs that drove the air from his lungs. He responded with an elbow to the man's face, heard bone crunch. Grace screamed. The third man had grabbed her, was trying to drag her back toward the alley. She fought like a wildcat, scratching and biting, but he was twice her size. Rage exploded in Jim's chest. He drove his knee into his current opponent's groin, then launched himself at the man holding Grace. His shoulder caught the man in the back, sent them both sprawling. Grace rolled away, scrambling to her feet. "Run!" Jim shouted. "Get help!" But Grace did not run. Instead, she picked up a piece of broken board from the alley entrance and swung it hard into the back of the nearest attacker's head. The man dropped like a stone. "Grace, damn it!" Jim grappled with another man, trading blows that were more desperate than skilled. "Run! Not without you!" She swung the board again, but one of the men caught it, yanked it from her hands. Jim's vision was starting to blur. A fist caught him across the jaw, spinning him around. He tasted blood. Another blow to his ribs. He was losing. They were losing. Then a gunshot split the night. Everyone froze. Sheriff Miller stood at the mouth of the alley, his pistol raised. Behind him were two deputies, also armed. "That is enough." Miller's voice carried the weight of law and a man who would not hesitate to enforce it. "You three, on the ground, now." The attackers hesitated. The math was not in their favor anymore. Slowly they complied, lying face down in the dirt. Miller kept his gun trained on them while his deputies moved in with handcuffs. "Jim, you all right?" Jim straightened slowly, every muscle screaming. His ribs felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them. His face was wet with blood from a cut above his eye, but he was upright. "I will live. Grace." "I am fine." Her voice shook, but she was standing steady. "Thank you, Sheriff." Miller approached the prisoners. "Victor Hayes, send you boys." Silence. "That is what I thought." Miller looked at Jim. "Thornton works fast. You made him angry today, asking around about witnesses hiring right. He does not like it." "Then he is going to really hate what comes next," Jim said. Miller's expression was grim. "You need to be careful, Jim. These men were just supposed to rough you up, scare you off. Next time, Thornton might send people with different orders." "Next time, I will be ready." They went back to the hotel under escort. Grace was silent, her face pale in the lamplight. Jim could see her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. At her door she paused. "Mr. Hartwell, Jim, thank you for protecting me." "You protected yourself pretty well with that board." Jim managed a pained smile. "But you should have run." "I am not very good at running." Grace met his eyes. "And I am not going to start now. Thornton wants me scared, wants me to leave. Well, I am scared. Terrified, actually. But I am not leaving." Something shifted in Jim's chest. Not just respect, though there was that. Something deeper. Something that felt dangerously like admiration mixed with fear for her safety. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we keep fighting." "Tomorrow we keep fighting," Grace agreed. She went inside. Jim stood in the hallway for a moment, cataloging his injuries. Cracked rib, probably. Cut above his eye would need stitches. Bruised face and hands. He had been in worse shape, but never with so much at stake. Inside his own room, he cleaned the blood from his face and assessed the damage more carefully. The cut above his eye was deep, but not critical. His ribs hurt like hell, but did not feel broken. He would be sore for days, but functional. A soft knock on his door made him tense. He grabbed his pistol before answering. Grace stood in the hallway, still dressed, a basin of water and clean cloth in her hands. "May I come in? You need those wounds tended." Every instinct screamed that this was improper. A woman in a man's room late at night. Alone. Unchaperoned. Exactly what Wright had warned them about. But the concern in her eyes overrode propriety. Jim stepped aside. Grace set the basin down and gestured for him to sit. She worked in silence, cleaning the cut above his eye with gentle efficiency. Her fingers were cool against his feverish skin. She was close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of someone who smiled often despite hardship. "This will need stitches," she said finally. "I can do it if you trust me. I stitched up my father more than once." "Do it," Jim said. She produced a needle and thread from her bag. Jim wondered if she always traveled prepared for medical emergencies or if she had anticipated violence. Probably both. Grace Mitchell was turning out to be far more capable than her genteel appearance suggested. The needle hurt. Jim had been stitched up before, knew the feeling. But he sat still, letting her work. Her hands were steady despite what they had just been through. "Why did you not run?" Jim asked. "When I told you to, you could have been safe." Grace did not pause in her stitching. "Because running would have meant leaving you to face 3 men alone. And I am not the kind of person who abandons people when they need help. You could have been seriously hurt, killed. So could you." She tied off the last stitch, snipped the thread. "We are in this together now, Jim, for better or worse. You cannot protect me from everything, and I will not let you try." She met his eyes. They were very close, too close. Jim could feel the warmth of her breath, could see the way her pulse beat in the hollow of her throat. "Grace," he said, his voice rough, "you need to go back to your room." "Why?" The word was barely a whisper. "Because if you stay, I am going to kiss you, and that would be a mistake." "Would it?" Grace's hand was still on his face, fingers gentle against the bruises. "Or would it just be inconvenient?" The distinction mattered. Mistake implied wrong. Inconvenient just meant poorly timed. And standing there with her so close, with adrenaline still singing through his veins, and the memory of almost losing her fresh in his mind, Jim found he could not quite remember why kissing her would be wrong. But he remembered Catherine, remembered the vows he had made, remembered that Catherine had been dead 3 years, but the guilt was still fresh. "Go, Grace. Please." She pulled back, hurt flashing across her face before she masked it. "Of course. I apologize for the impropriety." "You have nothing to apologize for." Jim's hands clenched into fists to keep from reaching for her. "I just need time to figure out what I am feeling, what is right." Grace gathered her things. At the door she paused. "Jim, you are allowed to be happy. Catherine would want that. Your son needs to see that, and you deserve it." Then she was gone, leaving Jim alone with his wounds and his thoughts, and a longing so sharp it felt like another knife wound to add to the collection. They returned to Hartwell Ranch 2 days later with a lawyer hired and a plan forming. Wright had managed to track down 3 former Thornton victims willing to testify. It was a start. Not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to make the fight viable. Tommy launched himself at Jim the moment the wagon pulled up. "Papa! Papa home!" Jim scooped up his son, ignoring the protest from his bruised ribs. "Hey, buddy, were you good for Uncle Ben?" "Very good. I practiced my letters. Want to see?" Grace and Tommy went off together, the boy chattering excitedly about everything he had done while they were gone. Jim watched them go, the easy affection between them obvious even after just a few days. Ben appeared from the barn, his face grave. "We had visitors while you were gone." Jim's hand went automatically to his pistol. "Thornton's men." "No, but his lawyer came with a new offer." Ben held out a document. "Says if Grace signs this statement admitting fault and agreeing to pay a reduced settlement of $250, Thornton will drop the lawsuit." Jim read the document. It was worse than Ben indicated. The statement did not just admit fault. It portrayed Grace as a manipulative woman who had deliberately avoided her contract in order to take a position with Jim. It implied impropriety. It destroyed her reputation while absolving Thornton of any wrongdoing. "I take it Grace has not seen this yet?" Jim asked. "Figured I would let you decide how to handle it." Jim crumpled the paper. We handle it by fighting. Grace is not signing anything that makes her look like a liar or a whore." "That is what I thought you would say." Ben's expression turned serious. "Brother, I need to ask, what is going on between you and Grace?" "Nothing." "Jim, I have eyes. The way you look at her, the way she looks at you, that is not nothing." Jim turned away. "She works for us. That is all." "Is it?" Ben came around to face him. "Because if it is more, you need to be careful. Thornton is going to use it, going to twist it into something ugly." "There is nothing to twist." "Maybe not now, but there could be. And when there is, you need to be sure. Catherine has been gone 3 years. You are allowed to move on, but Grace deserves better than being a substitute for a dead woman." The words hit harder than the fists in Helena. Jim felt anger flare. "You think I would do that? Use Grace that way? I think you are lonely and hurting, and Grace is kind and pretty and good with your son. I think it would be easy to confuse gratitude with something else." Ben's voice softened. "I am not saying you are. I am saying be sure before you let it become something more, for both your sakes." Jim wanted to argue, wanted to say Ben was wrong, but standing there with the crumpled settlement offer in his hand and the memory of almost kissing Grace still fresh, he could not. Because Ben was right. Jim did not know what he felt, did not know if what he saw when he looked at Grace was her or a ghost wearing her face, did not know if he was capable of loving someone new or if his heart had been buried with Catherine. And until he knew, until he was sure he could not risk hurting Grace, could not risk making her a casualty of his confusion. That night, Jim sat on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. The stars were brilliant overhead, cold and distant and uncaring of human troubles. He thought about Chicago, about the life he and Catherine had planned, about the way she had looked at him when Tommy was born, equal parts joy and terror in her eyes, about holding her hand as she died, feeling her slip away despite his desperate grip. He thought about Grace, about the way she laughed when Tommy got something right, about her quiet strength in the face of Thornton's threats, about how she had refused to run when attacked, about the warmth of her hand on his face and the invitation in her eyes. 2 women, one dead, one alive, one past, one present, and Jim caught between them, unable to move forward, unable to let go. The door opened behind him. Jack Murphy stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He passed one to Jim and settled into the other chair. "Heard about Helena," Jack said after a moment. "Heard you got into it with some of Thornton's boys." News travels fast. Always does. Ben's worried, Sarah's worried, and that girl inside is trying real hard not to show she is worried too. Jim sipped his coffee. "I can handle Thornton." "That is not what I am talking about." Jack fixed him with a look that had seen through Jim's defenses since he was 22 and desperate. "You are falling for her." Jim did not answer. Could not. "It is all right, you know. To want something besides just surviving. Catherine would not begrudge you happiness." "How do you know?" Jim's voice came out harsher than intended. "How do you know what Catherine would want? She is dead. I do not get to ask her. I know because I knew her. Knew she loved you enough to want you to live, not just exist." Jack's weathered face was kind. "And I know because I have been where you are. Lost my wife 20 years back. Thought I would die of the grief, but I did not. Life kept going. And eventually the pain faded enough that I could remember the love without the loss tearing me apart." "Did you find someone else?" "No, but that does not mean you should not." Jack set down his cup. "Grace is a good woman, strong, kind, would be good for Tommy, good for you if you let her. And if I am not ready, then you tell her that, honest, clear. Do not string her along while you figure it out. That is not fair to anyone." Jack stood, stretched, headed back inside. "Sleep on it, boss. Morning always makes things clearer." But morning brought no clarity, only more work, more tension, and the looming deadline of the court case. And Grace always there, teaching Tommy, helping Sarah, working beside Jim to prepare the ranch for winter. Close enough to touch but separated by an invisible wall Jim could not seem to cross. The wall was still there 3 days later when a rider from Silver Creek brought news that changed everything. Samuel Thornton was calling a town meeting. The town meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Silver Creek Town Hall. Word spread fast through the scattered homesteads and ranches that surrounded the small settlement. Samuel Thornton was calling the community together, and when a man with Thornton's wealth and influence called a meeting, people came. Some out of curiosity, some out of fear, some because they owed him money or favors and had no choice. Jim received the official notice 3 days before the meeting. A printed card, expensive paper delivered by one of Thornton's men. The message was formal and polite. Mr. Samuel Thornton cordially invited the citizens of Silver Creek and surrounding territories to a town meeting to discuss matters of mutual concern regarding property rights, contractual obligations, and community standards. Light refreshments would be served. "He is going to make this public," Ben said, reading over Jim's shoulder. "Going to paint you and Grace as the villains, get the whole town on his side. Let him try." Jim folded the notice and tucked it into his pocket. "We have nothing to hide." But the knot in his gut told a different story. Thornton was smart. He would not call a public meeting unless he was confident he could control the narrative. And in a town where half the businesses depended on Thornton's trade, where the bank was effectively owned by Thornton's money, public opinion was a weapon as deadly as any gun. Grace found Jim in the barn that evening checking tack by lamplight. She had Tommy with her, the boy already in his nightshirt and half asleep on her shoulder. "He wanted to say good night to his papa," Grace said softly. Jim set down the bridle he had been mending and took his son. Tommy's small arms went around his neck, the boy's breath warm against Jim's collar. "Night, Papa," Tommy murmured. "Love you." "Love you too, buddy." Jim held his son close, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood innocence. "Sweet dreams." Tommy was asleep before Jim finished the sentence. Grace smiled, that soft expression that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful. "He adores you," she said. "You are a good father, Jim." "I am trying." Jim shifted Tommy's weight. "Some days I feel like I am failing more than succeeding." "We all feel that way. But look at him." Grace gently brushed hair back from Tommy's forehead. "He is happy, healthy, loved. That is not failure." They walked back to the house together, moving slowly to avoid waking the boy. The September night was cool, the first real hint of the winter to come. In a few months, snow would blanket the ranch. They would need to have everything secured before then. Hay stored, fences mended, cattle moved to winter pasture, and the lawsuit resolved, one way or another. "Grace," Jim said as they reached the porch, "about the town meeting." "I am coming with you." Her tone left no room for argument. "This concerns me as much as you. Thornton is going to say things, ugly things, about you, about us, about our arrangement here." "Let him." Grace's chin lifted. "I know the truth. You know the truth. Anyone who matters knows the truth. The rest is just noise." Jim wanted to believe that, wanted to think that truth and character were armor enough against lies. But he had seen too much of the world to believe it completely. "All right," he said finally, "but we go together. We present a united front, and we let Thornton make the first move." "Agreed." Jim carried Tommy inside, tucked him into bed. The boy did not stir, lost in whatever dreams 3-year-olds had. Jim stood watching him for a moment, memorizing the peaceful face. Tommy was the reason for everything, the reason Jim fought, the reason he could not afford to lose. When he came back out, Grace was still on the porch. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. She looked small and vulnerable in the lamplight. But Jim knew better. Grace Mitchell was many things, but vulnerable was not one of them. "Jim," she said quietly, "if this becomes too much, if fighting Thornton puts Tommy at risk, I will leave. I do not want to, but I will." "No." The word came out harsher than he intended. "You are not leaving. We are not letting Thornton dictate our lives. Even if it means losing the ranch, losing everything you have built. The ranch is just land and buildings. Important, yes, but not as important as doing what is right. Jim moved closer, his voice dropping. You did nothing wrong, Grace. You were delivered to the wrong place by someone else's error. You accepted honest work with honest people. If the world punishes you for that, then the world is wrong. The world is often wrong. Grace's smile was sad. But we still have to live in it. Then we live in it with our heads up and our integrity intact. They stood in silence for a moment, the distance between them feeling both vast and insignificant. Jim was acutely aware of her, the curve of her neck, the way her hair caught the lamplight, the quiet strength that radiated from her like heat. He wanted to kiss her, had wanted to since Helena, since she had stood over him with that board in her hands refusing to run, since she had stitched his wounds with gentle fingers and looked at him like he was worth saving. But wanting and doing were different things. And until Jim could untangle his feelings for Grace from his guilt about Catherine, until he could be sure he was not just seeking comfort in the nearest warm body, he would not act on that want. Get some rest, he said, stepping back. Thursday will be a long day. Grace nodded, but there was something in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or understanding, or both. She went inside without another word. Jim stood on the porch long after the lamp in her window went dark. Stood and wondered how a man was supposed to move forward when the past held him with chains made of love and loss. The days before the town meeting passed in a blur of work and tension. The ranch needed constant attention, fences to mend, cattle to check, equipment to repair before winter made outdoor work impossible. Jim threw himself into physical labor trying to exhaust his body enough that his mind would quiet. It did not work. Grace was everywhere. In the kitchen making breakfast, in the yard teaching Tommy his numbers using pebbles, in the barn helping Jack sort tack. Always working, always useful, always there. And every time Jim looked at her, he felt that same confusing mix of desire and guilt, hope and fear. Sarah noticed. Of course she noticed. Women always did. You need to make a decision, Sarah said to Jim on Wednesday afternoon. They were in the vegetable garden harvesting the last of the late-season squash before the first frost. About Grace. There is no decision to make. She works for us, that is all. Sarah gave him the look, the one that said she was about to speak truth whether he wanted to hear it or not. Jim Hartwell, I have known you for 8 years. I watched you with Catherine. I know what love looks like on you, and what I am seeing now, it is love, or at least the beginning of it. I am not ready. Love does not wait for you to be ready. It just happens. Sarah pulled up a squash, examined it for blemishes. Catherine has been gone 3 years. You have mourned her, honored her, but she is gone, Jim. And Grace is here, alive, real, and caring about you whether you want her to or not. What if I hurt her? What if I start something I cannot finish? What if you do not, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Sarah straightened one hand on her back. Fear is not a good reason to avoid love. Neither is loneliness. So you think you are just lonely? That is all this is. Sarah's expression was kind but relentless. Tell me honestly, if Grace walked away tomorrow, took a position elsewhere, would you be relieved or devastated? Jim did not answer, could not, because he knew the truth, knew that if Grace left something essential, would go with her, something he had not even realized he needed until she was there providing it. That is what I thought, Sarah said softly. For what it is worth, I think Catherine would approve. She wanted you happy. She said so at the end, made me promise I would make sure you did not spend the rest of your life alone. She said that, while you were out of the room, she knew she was dying, knew Tommy would need a mother someday. She did not want her death to be the thing that defined the rest of your life. Sarah touched his arm. Give yourself permission to be happy, Jim. You have earned it. Thursday dawned clear and cold. Jim dressed carefully, not his work clothes, but the good suit he saved for church and funerals. If this was going to be a public judgment, he would face it looking like a man who had nothing to be ashamed of. Grace wore a dark blue dress, high-necked and modest. She pinned her hair up severely, making herself look older and more formal. Armor Jim recognized. She was preparing for battle just as he was. They left Tommy with Sarah and Emma. Jack and Ben would come to the meeting, but someone needed to stay with the ranch. Too much risk leaving it undefended. The ride to Silver Creek was quiet. Jim drove the wagon. Grace sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. Ben and Jack rode escort rifles across their saddles. No one was taking chances anymore. Silver Creek looked different when they arrived. More people than Jim had ever seen in the small town. Wagons lined the main street. Horses tied at every hitching post. The whole territory had turned out. The town hall was already full when they arrived. Jim recognized most of the faces. Farmers, ranchers, merchants, the people who made up the fabric of frontier life. Some nodded greeting, others looked away. The divide was already forming. Samuel Thornton stood at the front of the room near the raised platform that served as a stage for community events. He was 46 years old, tall and distinguished, dressed in an expensive suit that would not have looked out of place in Chicago or New York. Next to him stood a younger man in lawyer's clothes. Victor Hayes Thornton's foreman lurked near the door with several other Thornton men. Muscle in case talking failed. Thornton's eyes found Jim immediately. A smile crossed his face. Cold, calculating, the smile of a man who thought he had already won. Mayor George Thompson called the meeting to order. He was 60 years old, portly, with impressive whiskers and a reputation for fairness. But Jim could see the worry lines around his eyes. Thompson was caught between doing what was right and doing what was safe. And safe meant not crossing Thornton. "Good evening, everyone," Thompson said, his voice carrying through the crowded room. "Thank you all for coming. Mr. Thornton has requested this meeting to address some concerns affecting our community. I have agreed to moderate. Mr. Thornton, the floor is yours." Thornton stepped forward, every inch the successful businessman. "Thank you, Mayor. Friends and neighbors, I appreciate you taking time from your busy lives to be here tonight. I know we all have work waiting, so I will be direct." He paused, letting the silence build. Jim felt Grace tense beside him. "This community was built on trust," Thornton continued, "on keeping one's word, on honoring agreements and contracts. These are not just legal matters, they are moral matters. They speak to the character of who we are as a people." Several heads nodded. Jim's jaw clenched. Recently that trust has been violated. Thornton's voice carried just the right note of injured dignity. "I hired a governess from Pennsylvania, Miss Grace Mitchell. We exchanged letters, agreed on terms. She signed a contract to teach my children. I arranged transport, paid her passage, prepared accommodations." More nods. Thornton was good. Jim had to give him that. The man knew how to work a crowd. "But Miss Mitchell never arrived at my ranch. Instead, through what I can only assume was deliberate deception, she went to work for Mr. Jim Hartwell, a man who, as many of you know, I have had disagreements with in the past." The implication hung in the air. Not accident, conspiracy. "Now I am a reasonable man," Thornton said, spreading his hands in a gesture of openness. "I understand that mistakes happen. Stage drivers get confused. People change their minds. So I sent word to Mr. Hartwell asking for Miss Mitchell to honor her contract. Do you know what response I received? Silence in the hall, waiting. A letter informing me that Miss Mitchell had decided to work for the Hartwell Ranch instead. No apology, no compensation for my troubles, no acknowledgement that a contract had been broken, just a simple statement that they had made other arrangements. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jim felt people's eyes on him, judging, weighing. But it gets worse. Thornton's voice hardened. When I pursued my legal right to compensation through the courts, Mr. Hartwell hired a lawyer, not to negotiate, not to apologize, but to fight, to drag this matter through legal proceedings that will cost everyone involved time and money. That is not true. Grace stood before Jim could stop her. Her voice rang clear through the hall. The stage driver made an error. I was delivered to the wrong ranch. Mr. Hartwell offered shelter during a storm. when I learned of the fire at your ranch and your temperament, Mr. Thornton, I chose to accept employment elsewhere. That is my right as a free woman." Thornton turned to her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Mitchell, how kind of you to join us. Tell me, did you or did you not sign a contract agreeing to teach my children?" "We exchanged letters, but I signed no formal contract." "Perhaps you have forgotten." Thornton gestured to his lawyer, who produced a document and held it up for the room to see. "This is the contract bearing your signature, agreeing to 1 year of service beginning September 1st. Would you like to examine it?" Grace's face went pale. "That is a forgery. I never signed that document." "A convenient claim." Thornton's voice was sympathetic, like he was dealing with a confused child. "But the signature is clearly yours, witnessed and notarized." "By whom?" Jim stood now, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Who witnessed and notarized this supposed contract?" Thornton's smile widened. "A notary in Pennsylvania, Mr. Charles Blackwood, who will testify in court that Miss Mitchell came to his office and signed willingly." It was a trap, beautifully constructed. Unless Grace could get back to Pennsylvania and prove Blackwood was lying, which she could not afford to do, Thornton's story would stand unchallenged. "This is ridiculous," Ben said from beside Jim. "You are manufacturing evidence to bully a woman who did nothing wrong." "I am protecting my rights and my property," Thornton countered. "And I am warning this community. If we do not hold people accountable to their contracts, to their word, then we have no civilization. We have chaos. We have people like Mr. Hartwell who think they can take whatever they want without consequence." The crowd was turning. Jim could feel it, see it in the faces around them. Doubt, suspicion, the natural human tendency to side with the powerful because it was safer. Reverend Thomas Walsh stood from the back of the room. He was 60 years old, gray-haired, with the weathered face of a man who had spent his life ministering to hardship and doubt. But his eyes were clear and his voice steady. "Mr. Thornton," Walsh said, "you speak of character and trust. Let me ask you about your own character. How many families have you driven from this territory? How many businesses have failed after you withdrew your trade? How many debts have you called due early when it suited your purposes?" The room went dead silent. Thornton's expression hardened. "Reverend, I suggest you be careful with your accusations. I am not accusing. I am asking questions." Walsh moved down the aisle, his presence commanding despite his age. "The Williams family. You bought their land for half its value after their cattle mysteriously died. The Henderson Ranch. You foreclosed when they were 2 weeks late on a payment despite 3 years of on-time payments before that. The Chen family's store. You spread rumors of tainted goods that drove them out of business. Business is business, Reverend. I make hard decisions, yes, but legal decisions. Legal and moral are not always the same thing." Walsh turned to address the whole room. "I have been pastor here for 15 years. I have watched this community grow, and I have watched good people destroyed by bad men using the law as a weapon. Is that who we want to be?" Mayor Thompson cleared his throat nervously. "Reverend, I appreciate your perspective, but we are here to discuss Miss Mitchell's situation." "We are here to discuss Samuel Thornton's character," Walsh corrected, "because that is what this is really about. He wants to crush Jim Hartwell. Miss Mitchell is just the excuse." Jim felt something shift in the room. People were listening, considering. The spell of Thornton's narrative was cracking. Thornton must have sensed it too. His expression turned cold. "Fine. Let us discuss character. Mr. Hartwell, would you care to tell the good people here about Chicago? About why you really left? About the accusations of theft that followed you west?" Ice flooded Jim's veins. Thornton was playing his trump card. "There were no accusations of theft," Jim said, his voice level despite the rage building inside. "There were questions about embezzlement at the firm where I worked. Questions that pointed directly at you, Thornton. I confronted you. 2 days later, my partner died in a convenient accident, so Catherine and I left. We left because staying meant dying." The crowd erupted. Shocked murmurs, disbelieving gasps. Thompson banged his gavel for order. "That is slander." Thornton's composure finally cracked. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing on my part. I have suspicions, based on evidence that conveniently disappeared after Morrison's death." Jim stepped forward. "But you are right. I have no proof. Just like you have no proof that Grace conspired with me. Just forged contracts and bought testimony." "Gentlemen, please." Thompson's voice was desperate. "This is getting us nowhere." "I disagree." A new voice from the doorway. A woman's voice. "I think we are getting exactly where we need to be." Everyone turned. Eleanor Harrington stood in the entrance dressed in her traveling clothes from earlier that week. She had promised to come, had said she would expose Samuel in front of everyone, and now she was here. Jim caught her eye. She gave him a small nod. This was it, the moment they had planned. Grace reached for Jim's hand, squeezed once, together. Eleanor walked calmly down the aisle, ignoring the confused murmurs. She stopped in front of Samuel, and Jim saw his face drain of color. Thornton had not expected this, had not expected his sister to walk into his trap. "Hello, brother," Eleanor said, her voice carrying through the hall. "Surprised to see me." The room exploded into noise. Eleanor walked calmly down the aisle, ignoring the chaos. She stopped in front of Samuel, and Jim saw his face go through a series of emotions. Shock, anger, fear. "Hello, brother," Eleanor said. "We need to talk." The town meeting dissolved into chaos. Thompson tried to restore order, but it was useless. Half the room wanted to hear what Eleanor had to say. The other half wanted to leave before they got pulled deeper into what was clearly family business. Thornton grabbed Eleanor's arm. "What are you doing here? Stopping you from destroying more lives." Eleanor pulled free, her voice carrying clearly. "Mayor Thompson, may I speak?" Thompson looked like a man who desperately wished he were anywhere else. "Miss, I am not sure this is the appropriate forum. Reverend Walsh asked about my brother's character. I am here to answer that question." Eleanor turned to face the room. "My name is Eleanor Harrington. Samuel Thornton is my brother, and everything Mr. Hartwell said about Chicago is true." The room fell silent. Eleanor's voice was steady, but Jim could see the courage it took. "My father owned Morrison and Associates. When he died 10 years ago, he left the business to my Uncle Morrison and a controlling share of the profits to me and my brother equally. But Samuel wanted it all, so he altered the will, forged documents, embezzled client funds, and blamed others. And when Morrison discovered the fraud, Samuel arranged his death." Lies. Thornton lunged for his sister, but Victor Hayes caught him, held him back. "Lies and slander. I have proof." Eleanor produced a leather folder from her bag. Father's real will, letters from Samuel detailing the embezzlement, financial records showing money being moved illegally, and a statement from the driver of Morrison's carriage, the one who was paid to cause the accident. She handed the folder to Mayor Thompson. "It is all there. Everything needed to prove Samuel Thornton is a fraud and a murderer." The town hall erupted again. Some people moved toward the doors. Others pressed forward, wanting to see the documents. Thompson looked through the papers, his face growing pale. Jim's mind was reeling. Eleanor Harrington, Thornton's sister. She had come here, had brought evidence, was destroying her own brother to what saved Jim help Grace. Or was there another motive? Thornton had gone very still. His face was blank, but his eyes were calculating. Jim recognized that look. The look of a man deciding whether to fight or flee. Hayes and the other Thornton men moved closer to their boss. Hands went to guns. The temperature in the room changed from chaos to danger. "Nobody move!" Sheriff Miller's voice cut through the noise. He stood near the door, his pistol drawn, but pointed at the ceiling. "This meeting is over. Everyone goes home. Now." "You cannot arrest me on her word alone," Thornton said. His voice was controlled again. "She is a spurned sister with an axe to grind. Her evidence is probably forged, just like she claims mine is." "Maybe so." Miller's expression was hard. but I can hold you while we investigate, and I can make sure Miss Eleanor here stays safe while we sort this out." Thornton looked at his sister. Something passed between them. A lifetime of family history, secrets, betrayals. Then he smiled. Not the calculated business smile. Something colder. "You just made a mistake, Eleanor. A fatal one." It was a threat. Clear and direct. Miller moved forward. "Samuel Thornton, I am taking you into custody for questioning." "On what charge?" "Suspicion of fraud and threatening behavior." Miller gestured to his deputies. "Boys, escort Mr. Thornton to the jail, gently." Thornton allowed himself to be led away, but his eyes never left Eleanor's face. The promise in them was clear. This was not over. As the crowd began to disperse, Jim approached Eleanor. Up close he could see the fear beneath her composure, the exhaustion. She had dark circles under her eyes and her hands trembled slightly. "Miss Harrington," Jim said. "Why?" "Why help you?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "Because someone needs to stop him. Because he has already destroyed too many lives. And because—" She looked at Grace. "I will not let him destroy another innocent woman the way he destroyed me." Grace stepped forward. "What did he do to you?" "Locked me away for 8 years, in a sanitarium, said I was unstable, needed treatment." Eleanor's voice was flat, emotionless. The tone of someone who had processed trauma into something she could survive. "I finally escaped 6 months ago. Have been gathering evidence since. When I heard he was going after you, I knew it was time." "You could have just given the evidence to the authorities," Jim said. "I tried. But Samuel has connections everywhere. Judges, sheriffs, politicians. The evidence kept disappearing. Witnesses kept changing their stories." Eleanor looked at him directly. "I needed witnesses who could not be bought. A public forum he could not control. This meeting was perfect." "He threatened you," Grace said softly. "In front of everyone. He will come after you." "Let him try." Eleanor's smile turned bitter. "I have nothing left for him to take. He already took everything that mattered." The town hall had mostly emptied. Only Jim's group, Eleanor, Sheriff Miller, and Reverend Walsh remained. "Miss Harrington," Walsh said gently, "you need protection and a place to stay." "I have a room at the hotel." "No." Jim surprised himself by speaking. "You will stay with us, at the ranch. We have room and we have people who can watch your back." Ben nodded agreement. "Brother is right. Thornton will not try anything with all of us there." Eleanor looked like she might cry. "Thank you, but I have already caused you enough trouble." "You saved us," Grace said. She took Eleanor's hand. "Please, let us help you." So it was decided. They would take Eleanor back to Hartwell Ranch, would protect her until the investigation was complete, would stand together against whatever Thornton did next. As they prepared to leave, Mayor Thompson approached. "Jim, Miss Mitchell, I owe you an apology. I should have seen through Thornton's manipulation." "You were in a difficult position," Jim said. "That is not an excuse. A man stands for what is right, or he stands for nothing." Thompson straightened his shoulders. "For what it is worth, the town is with you. I will make sure of it." They left Silver Creek as the sun was setting. Jim drove the wagon with Grace and Eleanor. Ben and Jack rode escort again, more alert than ever. If Thornton was going to retaliate, it would be soon. But the ride back to the ranch was quiet. Too quiet. Jim felt the tension in his shoulders, the constant scanning of the horizon for trouble. Beside him, Grace was equally watchful. Eleanor sat in the back of the wagon, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I have made you targets." "We were already targets," Grace replied. "You just gave us weapons to fight back. If anything happens to you because of me, then we face it together." Jim glanced back at her. "That is how we do things here. We stand together." They reached the ranch without incident, but Jim's unease did not fade. Hayes and Thornton's men were still out there, angry, desperate, and desperate men did desperate things. He posted double watches that night, made sure everyone stayed inside after dark. checked his rifle and pistol, made sure both were loaded and ready. Grace found him on the porch hours later. Most of the household was asleep, but Jim could not settle. Too much adrenaline, too much worry. "You should rest," Grace said. "So should you." She sat beside him on the step, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "That was brave. What you did tonight, standing up for me in front of everyone." It was not bravery, it was truth. Truth takes courage when lies are more convenient. Grace looked up at the stars. Eleanor is remarkable. To survive what he did to her and still find the strength to fight back. She reminds me of you. Grace turned surprised. Me. Strong, determined, refusing to be a victim even when the world is trying to make you one. Jim met her eyes. You could have run, Grace. Could have gone back east, found another position, stayed safe. But you did not. You stayed and fought. I had reasons to stay. Her voice was soft. Tommy. Yes, Tommy. She paused. And you. The words hung between them. Jim felt his heart rate pick up. This was the moment, the edge of something that could not be taken back once crossed. Grace, I need to be honest with you. Jim forced the words out. I do not know what I am feeling. I care about you. More than I should, probably. But Catherine, I am not sure if I am ready to. You do not have to be sure. Grace's hand found his. Her touch was warm grounding. I am not asking for promises, Jim. I am not asking for anything except honesty. And time. If what you feel is real, time will prove it. If it is not, time will show that too. What if I hurt you? What if you do not? She squeezed his hand. I lost my parents, lost my home, lost everything I thought my life would be, and I survived. I am stronger than I look. If this does not work out, I will survive that too. But I would rather risk being hurt than never try at all. Jim looked at their joined hands, felt the rightness of it, the way her fingers fit between his, the way her presence settled something restless in his chest. I am falling in love with you, he said. The words came out rough, unpracticed. I think I have been since you stepped off that stage, and it terrifies me. Good, Grace smiled. Love should terrify you a little. It means it matters. Jim pulled her closer. She came willingly, her head resting on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, holding each other in the Montana darkness. It was 2 hours before dawn when the barn caught fire. Jim woke to the sound of horses screaming. He was moving before his mind fully processed the danger, grabbing his rifle and running for the door. Behind him he heard Ben's voice. Jack's the household coming alive in controlled chaos. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching 30 feet into the night sky. The horses inside were panicking, their screams cutting through the roar of fire. "Get water!" Jim shouted. "Ben, help me with the horses!" They ran toward the inferno. The heat was incredible, pushing them back. Jim pulled his shirt over his mouth and nose and charged through the door. Smoke seared his lungs. Flames licked at the walls. The horses were in their stalls, wild with terror. Jim threw open the first stall. Ranger reared, nearly trampling him. "Easy, boy, easy." He grabbed the halter, led the terrified horse toward the door. Ben was beside him, leading out the mare Grace used. They worked frantically, pulling out horse after horse. Jack joined them. Then Grace appeared, her face covered with a wet cloth. "Get back to the house," Jim shouted over the fire's roar. "Not without you." She grabbed another horse, led it out. They saved 6 horses. But the barn was lost. The structure collapsed inward with a sound like the world ending. Sparks shot into the sky. The heat drove everyone back. They formed a bucket line from the well, throwing water on the surrounding buildings to keep the fire from spreading. It took hours. By the time the barn was nothing but smoking ruins, dawn was breaking over the mountains. Jim stood looking at the destruction. Decades of work. Gone. The barn had held equipment, stored hay, protected animals. Now it was ash and charred wood. Jack appeared at his elbow. "Found something you need to see." Behind the barn, where the fire had not quite reached, Jack pointed to the ground. boot prints, and an empty kerosene can. Arson, Jim said flatly. Thornton's men. Had to be. Jack's weathered face was grim. They waited until we were all asleep, poured kerosene, lit it up. Grace joined them, her face smudged with soot. Is anyone hurt? No, but we lost the barn, lost our winter hay, lost most of our equipment. Jim felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. This is going to set us back years. But we saved the horses, Grace said, and the house, and each other. That is what matters. She was right. But it did not make the loss any easier. They spent the day sifting through the ruins, salvaging what they could. Sheriff Miller arrived mid-morning with news. Thornton had made bail. His lawyers had argued that Eleanor's evidence was circumstantial, that she was an unreliable witness due to her history of mental instability. Thornton's sanitarium records had been presented to the judge, forged records almost certainly, but effective. Where is he now? Jim asked. Left town, headed back to his ranch. Miller's expression was apologetic. I am sorry, Jim. I tried, but he has too much pull with the judge. After Miller left, Jim called a meeting. His family, Grace, Eleanor, Jack. They gathered in the main house, soot-stained and exhausted. We need to make a decision, Jim said. Thornton is not going to stop. He will keep coming at us until we are destroyed or dead. So we have three choices. We fight, we run, or we surrender. We do not surrender, Ben said immediately. Running would just delay the inevitable, Jack added. Man like Thornton does not forget. Then we fight. Jim looked around the room. But I need everyone to understand what that means. It means more attacks, more violence, maybe someone getting killed. If anyone wants out, now is the time. I will not think less of you. No one moved. All right then. Jim's voice was steady, but inside he felt the weight of what they were committing to. We fight, but we fight smart. We document everything. We gather witnesses. We build a case that even Thornton's money cannot overcome. And in the meantime, Sarah asked, in the meantime we protect what is ours. We watch each other's backs, and we do not let Thornton make us into victims. The meeting broke up. People went to their tasks, but Grace lingered. Jim, she said quietly, I should leave. This is too dangerous. If I am gone, Thornton has no reason to keep attacking. No, Jim's voice was firm. You leave, he wins. He gets to dictate who lives here, who works here, who we care about. I will not give him that power. Even if it means losing everything. We have already lost the barn. What else can he take? Jim moved closer. Besides, you are not just an employee anymore. You are family, and family does not abandon each other. Grace's eyes shone with unshed tears. Family, Jim confirmed. She stepped into his arms. He held her, feeling her tremble with exhaustion and fear and something else. Hope, maybe, or determination, or love. They stood like that until Sarah called them for supper, until the daily rhythm of ranch life reasserted itself, until the crisis of the moment faded into the ongoing challenge of survival. But as Jim lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he knew this was far from over. Thornton had escalated, had shown he was willing to destroy property, willing to risk lives. The next attack would be worse, and Jim had no idea how to stop it. Tommy's voice woke him before dawn. The boy was crying, calling for Papa. Jim went to him, found him sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. Bad dream, buddy. Fire. Tommy sobbed. Fire everywhere. Papa hurt. Jim gathered his son close. Papa is fine. The fire is out. We are all safe. But Tommy would not be consoled. He clung to Jim's small body, shaking, and Jim realized with a cold certainty that Thornton was not just attacking the ranch. He was attacking their peace, their sense of safety, making it so even a 3-year-old could not sleep without fear. That was when Jim made his decision. No more defense, no more reacting. It was time to go on the offensive, It was time to end this, once and for all.